Hello, Meoni here, and welcome back to another Final Fantasy XIV video. This time we're continuing our look at the Blue Mage, and in particular, this is something I've been requested to make a video on, so I thought, you know, I've never been one to shy away from a challenge. Let's go and complete the mass Carnivale, and in particular, people have been requesting this fight and a guide to it for quite some time. This is round number 29, known as Red, Fraught, and Blue. You will be familiar with these models if you have ever fought Living Liquid, because essentially it is those fights back to back, a blue version and a red version. So we're going to have both acts back to back of how to actually do this in just one fell swoop. There are a couple of mistakes in this footage. I try to limit the time spent as much as possible, and obviously is not the fastest, most optimal way of doing this. This is just literally a basic guide of how you too can complete this with a very meager skill, because I am not the most skilled player in the universe by any stretch of the imagination. So these are the spells I actually used. First of all, you're going to need Reflux. This is something I would highly recommend, and not only is this useful for the second fight, because obviously in Act 2 you're dealing with a water enemy, so lightning does increase damage against it, but also there's a stage where some adds come out, these hands, and Reflux actually has this added ability of placing a heavy on the target. The heavy debuff is incredibly useful, considering it'll take the hand adds much longer to actually get to you, meaning you'll take less damage. It also does quite a lot of damage with Bristle to boost that. Speaking of Bristle, you'll want to pick up Bristle as well whilst you're at it. You'll need that, as well as Off Guard as well, to make it so that your target takes the most possible damage whenever that's off cooldown. The other thing is Alpine Draft. This is something I personally chose to use. There are other spells, wind spells you could use, but essentially for the first phase we're going to be spamming that because fire is weak to that wind damage, and that's the one I chose. So we've got Reflux for the second phase, Alpine Draft for the first phase, we've got Off Guard, and we've also got Bristle. Other things I would definitely recommend are things like Exuviation, which allows you to remove detrimental effects off of you and provides you a little bit of a heal. White Wind is very much useful. Etherical Mimicry for that DPS stance, because we want to kill it this time this year, not in the future. Diamondback is very recommended, especially if there are AoEs that you just can't move out of. It's always better to Diamondback out of them, and Diamondback is actually mandatory for the second phase of this fight. Toad Oil is something very useful to have, but isn't detrimental to the fight. Then there are things like Ravana's Super Naka, which is a great off global that you can spam whilst on the move. You've got Garuda's Feather Rain, which is great because it applies a dot, and because it's wind damage, it does increased amounts of damage in phase 1. And then we have stuff like Glass Dance, which is incredibly useful, which is the Shiva Arrow ability, which again is off global cooldown, so you can press that whenever you like, whenever it's off cooldown, and get some bonus damage. You're also going to need Flying Sardine as well, because there are mandatory interrupts, otherwise you will wipe, so make sure you definitely pick that one up. So let's actually move on to the fight, and I'll show you literally step by step exactly what I did. Okay, here we are. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to focus target. We're going to Toad Oil up because we always like that extra defense. Going to start with Bristle, then Off Guard, and then start casting our Alpine Drafts. Bear in mind you can get about 2 in before you'll need to actually start interrupting. So you'll see Fluid Swing. We're going to Sardine that. Make sure you do that. That's the interrupt you'll see throughout the entire fight. So always have this target focused, and then you can interrupt it. So Sea of Flames basically is like Ifrit's ability, where it places down these explodey areas. You just move from them. I used my Super Naka to get in a lot of damage there, and also Feather Rain. We got Pyretic. Simply take your hands away from your keyboard and mouse, wait for the debuff to run off, and then move. If you move before the debuff runs out, you will take damage and can actually die from that. So Pillar of Flame, so it can be anywhere. It could be inside or outside first, then inside. Just go basically to the safe zone, nothing too tricky there. Rush is an ability where you need to go as far away as possible to reduce the amount of damage it takes, and at this point you should have Off Guard back off of cooldown, so reapply that with Bristle, and then start casting Alpine Draft, because Flare Star is just a proximity marker in the center of a room, which does damage based on how close you are to it. You'll notice here that 3 tornadoes have spawned. There's a safe zone that hasn't got a tornado, and at the same time there's these line AoEs. At the same time as that, there's Fluid Swing to interrupt. Simply move from the AoEs and interrupt with the Sardines. And then there's the other Pillar of Flame. You'll note here that because we went to the area where there was a lack of that 4th tornado, we had a safe zone to sidestep into. Next we have another Rush, and again it's perfectly placed, so we go between these tornadoes. We're going to reapply that Windburn with the Feather Rain there to do a bit of extra damage, and then it's simply a case of you running into the center, finding the safe zone for the next Pillar of Flame, and then moving accordingly. I made that look fairly easy. Sometimes you can get into a bit of a mix, but remember after that second rush just to go to the center of the room. Don't forget the interrupt here with Fluid Swing. We don't want that to go off. Fluid Swing will knock you out of the room and does a lot of damage. If you don't die, you'll be close to it. And then he pretty much repeats. So we have Sea of Flames again with those eruptions to avoid. Then we can get a bit of extra damage in if we want to. And then there's another Pyretic, so we're taking our hands and, off our keyboard and mouse, and we're not going to move until that debuff runs out, and then we move before the Fire 2 finishes its cast. At this point, we just spam whatever we've got, and make sure we use Lucid, because we want to get as much mana as possible for that second phase, because it doesn't reset between phases whilst moving between those pillars. And as you can see, he died there just before that second explosion. So that was the first phase. That's the phase that everybody says is the easiest. So, I will completely agree. That was completely ruffle stomp. I fluked it the first time around, I failed a couple of times afterwards, and then I realized how simple that is. So the second phase is basically his water version. So we're going to be off guarding and bristling with Reflux this time. Reflux is what we're going to try and cast as much as possible. Protein Wave, we can actually move out the first one and then just take the second one to the face. It only does about 1000 damage anyway, and that's even with DPS stance, so it's not too much of an issue. He casts Throttle, which puts this horrible debuff on us, so I Exuviation that, and then I White Winded, just to top myself up, and then he moves to the center of a room for Ferrofluid. Now this can be a mixture of anything. If you get 2 symbols that match, i.e. the boss, and you have a symbol that matches, move into melee range of a boss to survive the attack. If they are opposites of each other, go to the sides of a room, and then you'll be pulled inwards, and that's simply how you do that mechanic. Fluid Ball basically finishes a cast, and then straight away afterwards 2 balls will drop, so we simply move from those like you can see there. We have a Fluid Swing to interrupt here with Sardines, and then we're going to recast White Wind just to top ourselves off, because we're getting close to the transition with the ads now. So get a few refluxes off. There's another Protean Wave, so we move from the first one and we take damage from the second one. Actually, we don't, because we skipped straight into that ad phase. Watery Grasp is spawning these 2 hand ads that are weak again to lightning damage, so we're going to actually bristle before they spawn, off guard the first one, and reflux. That should take up a lot of its health. We're going to reflux again, and then swift cast and reflux again, and we're going to try and do the same to this one. We're going to bristle first. You'll notice that the more that we apply reflux, the heavier we get these things. We don't want that heavy to run off really. Interrupt the Fluid Swing from the main boss. That's a sneaky one. He tries to fit in there, so don't forget about that. Whilst the ads are up, he will do that Fluid Swing. I'm going to fit in another reflux, and there's the death of that. Now we're going to want to cast Diamond Back. This is a mandatory Diamond Back to survive Big Splash. If you don't Diamond Back, you will die, so literally this is impossible without this spell. Wait for that to run out, and then White Wind yourself to full health. Try and time it so that you can actually get yourself to full health before he starts casting Cascade. Cascade is nothing to worry about. It's just a big AoE, and also spawns these tornadoes. There are 2 patterns of these tornadoes. There's the interrupt as well, by the way. Don't forget those. The 2 spawns of those are like 4. There are like 3 around the room, equidistant from each other, and then there's 3 with a blank, like you can see here. Depending on which RNG you have, just make sure you're in between those tornadoes to avoid the AoEs. We've got Protean Wave there as well. There's nothing too difficult about this. It just happens very quickly, one after each other, making narration quite difficult. We've got another Fluid Ball there, and as you can see, they are actually erupting. So we're going to go over here and make sure we're fully healed. Throttle has been applied, but we also have a fluid swing to interrupt, so we exuviation and then sardine that to interrupt it. Personally, I should have probably sardined before exuviation on that, just to make sure. So we have 2 of the same again, so that's really good RNG. So I'm going to go in close, and he's going to push us back into the safe zone. Remember, if you get 2 of the same icon above you, then you stack in melee range, and if you get 2 opposites, you want to go to as far away as possible and be sucked in to avoid the damage. So we've got a bit of hit there from Protean Wave. That's not a problem. That's the least of our worries. Another fluid swing to interrupt yet again. He tries to put these fluid swings in the most awkward sort of places in the timeline, as you could probably tell, especially when you need a heal or you're currently casting something. But as long as you just keep your eyes open, you can cancel what you're casting and make the most of it. Like you see here with Fluid Ball, I'm just moving around and I'm casting Super Naka repeatedly. This is the second big splash, so you know what to do. This is another diamond back, otherwise you will die. And this last sort of phase of the fight is really, really simple. He just repeats the main mechanics. There are no return of the ads. We've dealt with the ads permanently, so at least you don't have to deal with that. Just cascade, so make sure you're fully healed. Bristle and off guard your way to victory, watching out for these tornadoes. So again, we can look at these because the first time I wasn't able to talk about them. There's another fluid swing. Remember, you're going to get about 2 to 3 fluid swings within the most annoying phase of this. These are going to erupt eventually as well, but we're just going to focus on moving from as much of this as humanly possible. I'm going to take probably a Protean Wave to the face there, but he's getting pretty low, and all we have to do is when they set off to explode, we just simply go to the safe area. We've got another Fluid Ball to avoid. No doubt the explosions are imminent. There we go. I'm going to go over here, and we're just going to reflux him to death. Take those hits to the face. We do actually have throttle on us. We're going to interrupt the fluid swing before we die, because that could have been a really bad thing. It was on 0.4%, and I nearly didn't interrupt him. That would have been the worst wipe known to history. The secret to this is don't get greedy. Just try and plan ahead as much as you can, but cancel everything for those interrupts. They're the most important detrimental part of this fight. Apart from that, it was very simple. I didn't think it was that difficult. There are more difficult fights in the Carnival from my own perspective. A lot of people have been having issues with this. I really hope that this has helped in some way to those who are still struggling, and I wish you the best, and I'll see you all next time.